evening, ladies. Today I will be discussing the state corporate crimes that are associated with climate change. These crimes are perpetuated by both the state and by the corporations that make up the fossil fuel industry, and the effects and harms of these blameworthy actions are already beginning to be visible, although the problem will only continue to get worse. The fossil fuel industry and the state are both major contributors to anthropogenic climate change. Through their actions and lack of action, huge amount of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide and methane, have been released into the atmosphere. During the Industrial Revolution, the burning of coal to generate electricity became far more widespread than it had been before. Since then, we have continued to use coal to generate energy, along with finding new ways to extract and burn other fossil fuels. Burning coal and other fossil fuels results in the emission of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide or methane into the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases trap heat in the atmosphere, meaning that the Earth is heating up. Left unregulated, this can create serious problems for Earth and her inhabitants. This was first confirmed in 1958, when a scientist named Dr. Charles David Keeling measured the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and through analyzing his results, he was not only able to conclude that the CO2 levels were rising, but that they were rising as a result of the burning of fossil fuels. However, little has been done since then to actually slow or stop the emission of greenhouse gases from the United States. The fossil fuel industry has made it their priority to block or prevent rules and regulations that would limit their ability to profit off the extraction and use of fossil fuels. Companies like Exxon started doing research on climate change and its potential effects in the 1970s. Since learning of the harms that their actions could create, they have done a number of things to downplay the consequences of their industry. They have continued to extract, market, and burn their fossil fuels for decades after conducting their research, refusing to pursue any alternative avenues for generating energy. Another action that corporations within the fossil fuel industry have taken is to fund climate change denial groups that spread doubt and misinformation about the truth of climate change. One example of this is the Koch brothers, leaders of Koch Industries, a corporation that is responsible for the extraction of fossil fuels. They have poured their political influence and large amounts of money into funding efforts to block or repeal laws or policies that would support the widened deployment of renewable energy. And it's not just the corporations within the fossil fuel industry. Politicians have also been participating in the denial of climate change. For example, Donald Trump, former president of the United States, not only spread misinformation about the realities of climate change by calling perspectives he does not share fake news, but Trump also worked hard to undo any steps that former President Barack Obama had taken to address climate change. This includes pulling out of the Paris Agreement, which was a monumental step backwards. The Paris Agreement is the first internationally agreed upon plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. As the United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world and one of the countries who contributes the most to the issue, participation in the Paris Agreement was vital when it came to achieving the goal of reducing climate emissions. Another example of the actions taken by the US government that worsen the issue is the decision to partake in wars, directly and indirectly, that require the use of large amounts of natural resources. Throughout every step of a war, fossil fuels are used to assist with the process, such as the transportation and production of materials or the transportation of troops. One thing about this is really interesting because military leaders in the US recognize the realities of climate change, and they also recognize it as a future national security threat. Finally, perhaps the biggest crime that the US government has committed when it comes to climate crimes is the crime of inaction. For years, environmental activists have called for policies or regulations that would restrict the fossil fuel industry and help to mitigate the climate crisis, and yet politicians continue to ignore the problem outright or even claim it as a non-issue. By refusing to address the existence of the problem or make an attempt at working to reduce the scale of the issue, politicians are neglecting their responsibility to protect the public health of their citizens. In fact, this argument has been made in a lawsuit by the 2015 case Juliana versus the United States. In this case, 21 kids sued the United States government, claiming that the government has violated their constitutional rights to life, liberty, and property, along with failing to protect essential public trust resources. As of right now, this case has not yet gone to trial, as it is being opposed by the U.S. Department of Justice and multiple Republican attorneys. The inability to make a solid and lasting decision among U.S. politicians is something that is actively harming our climate and our future. It has been established for almost 70 years that rising carbon dioxide levels are the result of human activity, and still there have been few serious steps to take action. The Paris Agreement is a clear example of this. America has joined, pulled out, and rejoined all within the past 3 presidencies. In addition, politicians attempting to pass environmental policies face strong opposition from the Republican Party, which makes it much, much harder to get anything done and has contributed to the lack of action of our government. Climate change will have a number of repercussions. Extreme weather phenomena such as storms, hurricanes, and tornadoes will occur more frequently and will become even more devastating. Plant and animal species will die off. In addition, climate conflicts will start to arise as people flee their homes to escape the wrath of climate change. There will be conflicts over natural resources such as fresh food or water. Climate refugees will be displaced, and they will likely be met with military force. Climate conflicts and climate refugees seeking a place to go are one of the main reasons why U.S. military leaders consider climate change to be a potential future national security threat. Although countries in the global north, including the United States, are the main contributors to climate change, the nations of the global south will be the main victims of climate change, despite the fact that these nations have done the least to contribute to the problem at hand. In addition to all of the people who will be victimized by the results of climate change, the ecosystems and habitats of animals who have done nothing to contribute to the crisis will be destroyed, which will be devastating to life on Earth. Climate crimes fall under the realm of state corporate crime. State corporate crime is the illegally or socially injurious actions that result from a mutually reinforcing interaction between the state and a corporation. Corporations within the fossil fuel industry fund lobbyist groups, which then can use their political power to influence politicians to act within the interests of the fossil fuel industry. In return, the politicians benefit from protecting the corporation's interests by gaining the support of the corporation. In this way, both the corporation and the politician support each other, ensuring that they both remain in power. Like many other state corporate crimes, climate crimes are often unrecognized. These harms are despised socially and are morally blameworthy, but there are no strong sanctions against them by the state. However, climate crimes can be classified as crimes from a moral and social standpoint. Because of the actions of the powerful corporations and those in the state who have contributed to the problem or been reluctant to take steps to fix the problem, there will be various harms placed upon our society and the rest of the planet. One of the theories that has proven most effective when it comes to understanding why climate crimes occur is the treadmill of production theory. This theory was developed in 1980 by Schneiberg, and basically this theory states that corporations put investments into replacing workers with production technologies which use up natural resources and creates more profit. There would then be more investments into production, which would increase the demand for natural resources, increase profits, and decrease the amount of money that corporations would need to pay workers. The expansion of the treadmill was said to be in the hopes of furthering social progress, and so it was widely supported by the workers, even those who had been displaced by the new, cheaper means of production. In addition, expanding the treadmill of production was beneficial to the shareholders, who were able to gain more political power, which they could use to get the government and labor unions to support the expansion of the treadmill. Through getting rid of workers and replacing them with updated means of production, the corporations were able to save money and increase profits. They could then use some of these profits to fund political lobbying groups who benefited politicians, who then worked to protect the corporation and their interests. These new technologically improved means of production wouldn't be possible without fossil fuels, which means that these corporations also supported the interests of the fossil fuel industry. If changes in policies were made that made rules and regulations concerning the burning of fossil fuels, that would greatly harm the amount of profit made by corporations who depend on fossil fuels to keep their treadmills of production working. Therefore, there are many actors who work to keep the fossil fuel industry running and active. Capitalism plays a big role in this. One of the core factors of capitalism is the fact that corporations place profits over people. It is not their concern that they are harming the earth. Their concern is in making as much profit as they can for as little money as they can. In this theory, we can see the ways in which the economy interacts with politics. As regulating fossil fuels and their uses would have a major negative effect on the economy, many politicians are hesitant or unwilling to do so. Another theory that can help to explain climate crimes is the doctrine of rationality. This is the idea that individuals make rational choices after a cost-benefit analysis. This theory states that humans are pleasure-seeking creatures and that criminals are people to whom the criminal act is more important than the punishment. This theory can be applied to climate crimes. For fossil fuel corporations, their ability to make profits off the burning of fossil fuels is far more important than any punishment that could be given to them at this point in time, largely fees and fines. It is much, much easier for them to reach their goals of making profit by continuing to extract and market fossil fuels than it is to look for and market alternative methods of renewable energy. If their path to pleasure is already established and the punishment is not severe enough to deter them from their actions, they do not have a convincing enough reason to stop. One really important thing that needs to be done is we need to switch our source of energy from fossil fuels into renewable energy sources. We need to find alternatives to fossil fuels, ways to power our lives without causing the same harms to the planet. One way in which this can be done is by taking money that had previously been invested into the fossil fuel industry and investing it into research, seeking to find a viable alternative to fossil fuel. This can be done through social movements. It is impressive the power that large amounts of social pressure can have over investors. We have seen this strategy of pressuring investors to divest money from the fossil fuel industry be successful before. For example, students at Harvard staged protests and called attention to the university's investments in the fossil fuel industry, which resulted in the university pulling their investments. Another thing that we must do in order to hold these corporations responsible is to pass laws criminalizing their actions. One idea that the textbook had was to create the crime of ecocide, which is the severe damage of the environment of a particular area to the extent that its inhabitants can no longer live life to the fullest. If trying to use the American political system is not effective, then perhaps we can place pressure on the fossil fuel industry through the courts. Through criminalizing these behaviors and actions, we will raise the punishments for corporations who are partaking in these harms. As the company is most interested in making profits, losing money in lawsuits levied against the company would help to work as a motivator for them to find new ways in which energy can be generated. In addition to hopefully deterring corporations from committing acts against the environment, criminalizing these behaviors will also work to hold these corporations responsible for their actions, taking a small step towards achieving climate justice. Finally, there needs to be an internationally agreed upon accord which will set carbon reduction targets on a realistic timeline. This accord would need to be legally binding, and progress made by nations must be publicly shared. Through making the accord legally binding, nations will be held accountable to following through on their promises by the law. In addition, by requiring nations to share their progress publicly, it will also hold nations and their leaders accountable to their peers. It is really easy to feel helpless about the situation. As individuals, we often feel like we do not have the power or influence that is necessary when it comes to actually making a difference in the world. This may be true on our own, but time and time again, we have seen the effects that protests and social pressure can have on the leaders of the world. If we want to preserve our planet for our sake and the sake of those who will come after us, then we need to act on their behalf now. The first step in doing so is to come to the group consensus that not only is climate change real, but it is the direct result of human activities and that corporations and political leaders have committed a crime in both their lack of action and their opposition to attempts to try to reduce the effects of human activities. Thank you both very much.